What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Moonbuilt Garage. Today I want to start doing the reassembly of my 46 RH transmission. I pulled this transmission out of a 91 Ramcharger to install into my D100 shop truck project. And while it was working okay, I was noticing a lot of high temps while driving around. And I decided that I'm pretty sure it was the torque converter. I was starting to notice a lot of slippage. So I pulled the transmission to replace the torque converter, and then I found that the front pump was leaking. So fix that leak, and then starting to put everything back together, and well, I broke the output shaft support, or the overdrive piston support. Yeah, kind of broke that. So in order to get that out, I ended up having to do a full tear down of the transmission. So last video I did an inspection, making sure everything else was good to go inside there. I had to order a couple of parts, but now those parts are starting to come in, so I'm ready to start doing the reassembly. So the first thing I want to do is take this thing outside, hit it with some oven cleaner, take the pressure washer to it, and get some of this little bit of grime off this thing. I cleaned it up when I first got it home from the pick apart, and I got it about 95% clean, but there were still a few real stubborn spots that haven't gotten clean yet. So I'm going to give it another shot and see if I can get that last remaining bit of crud off this thing. All right, with everything cleaned up, I'm ready to start my assembly. I'm going to start with the overdrive piston support. So I've got my two gaskets here in place, and I'm going to take some transmission fluid, lube up the snout, and then start assembly. I've also got two bolts here that are actually two of the longer bolts from out in the valve body. Once I get this started, I'll use these as guide pins, and then I'll be able to tap this in place. Now, this is super soft aluminum, so you don't want to be hitting directly on the piston support. That's what the plywood's for. So let's get started. Once the overdrive piston housing is fully seated, I'm going to drive down the mounting bolts, and these get torqued to 150 inch-pounds. But since this is such soft aluminum, I'm going to kind of do it in steps. I'm going to go 50, then 100, and then 150 inch-pounds. I realize that's probably maybe playing it a little too safe, but you can never be too safe. So I'm going to torque this thing down. One had me a little nervous. All right, with all that done, now it's time for the overdrive piston. So I'm going to lube up this outer seal and this inner seal right down in here with some transmission fluid. And then these little nubs here on the back line up with these locations in the housing. Right. And you know you're lined up right when you have just this little bit of side-to-side motion. You know those two nubs are lined up with their corresponding location in the housing. Now we install the spacer. Again, just a little bit of keeping everything nicely lubed. Some of this already has fluid on it from when I took it apart, but a little bit of extra never hurt. All right. And then the bearing. So there's a lip here on this side of the bearing that locates it inside of that spacer. So again, just put some fluid on it just to make sure everything stays nice and lubed. And then that will go like that. All right, with that all done, I'm now ready to put on the overdrive housing. A couple of things. So I did not replace the seal that goes on the pump. If you're doing this and you decide to replace that seal, you may have to use something like a feeler gauge to kind of help get that seal inside the housing. I was able to just kind of put the pump on, wiggle it around, and it dropped right in. So I didn't have to worry about that. That seal was already used in this situation. Also, since this is a 46 RH, I have two tubes here that are in the overdrive housing. These two tubes right here, I need to make sure those tubes line up with these two holes. Also, these three mounting holes here along the bottom, see if I can get a better angle on that. So these three holes here are wet, which means the back side of these holes are open to the inside of the case, which means they're open to fluid. So I'm going to make sure to put a little red RTV, a little silicone RTV on those screws, and that way it'll just help seal the threads when I bolt down the overdrive housing. So before I can put the overdrive housing on, I need to put in the low reverse band along with the linkage and adjustment plates and all that other good stuff. So in order to put this in, the first piece you're going to want to look at is this bracket, this adjustment linkage, or the band linkage, I guess it's called, or something like that. Anyway, there's two different arcs in these plates. So the short arc goes towards the case and the larger arc goes towards the band. So we'll set that in place in here. Now the reason you have to put all this in first is because there's a pin that holds this in place, and the pin comes in from the back of the case and is actually retained by part of the housing of the overdrive section. So get the pin started, line up the first hole in the plate. Maybe, there we go. All right, then we get the lever. Now with the lever, there's also the part in here, I forget what this is called anyway, but there's a small divot on this piece that goes inside the lever. That divot has to face towards the adjustment screw. The adjustment screw is actually going to impact on that little divot. So this will go in next. Get that started. Then the adjustment lever, again with the divot facing towards the adjustment screw. Then we can, if I can find my dead blow, I can get that seated the rest of the way. Now I've already lubed up the O-rings. There's two O-rings on the back side that'll seal it on the case. Drive it in. Now I also have a punch somewhere. There it is. You can use to drive it in the rest of the way. I'm not going to force it. Once everything lines up, there you go. And it bottoms out. There's actually there's actually on the end of that pin where it goes in, there's a taper here on the end. So it just comes into this hole right here, and that taper just kind of bottoms out. These bolts all get torqued to 25 foot-pounds. Might want to try chalking your wheels. So now we can flip the transmission up vertical the other way and move on to installing the intermediate shaft. Now we just want to make sure that we have this end here with the snap ring groove. This end's going to stay up into the case. This is the end that goes down into the overdrive section. So just get this down inside there. And it just drops into place. So with that in, now we can go on to putting in the low reverse band and this rod. This is the rod that goes between the lever and this notch here on the band, and that's how you adjust via this screw here, the adjustment screw. That's how you adjust the tension on the low reverse band. So we'll get this into place and we'll continue on. All right, so hopefully this is a good enough angle. So here's the low reverse band. I'm going to drop this into place, and what you're going to do is this piece here is going to lock in to the bar on this end. So get it down inside there. All right, then we rotate it around so that those lock together. And then we take, again, this, I think this is like 1 inch by 1 1/4 or something like that. And it's got this bull nose on it. I'm not sure how well it's going to show up there. But this edge with the bull nose is what rides against the adjustment screw. Down inside here, there's the adjustment lever. And that notch right there, I'll hopefully be able to zoom in and give you a better shot of that. But this piece is going to go in there basically like that, and it's going to ride right inside there. It's kind of a pain, but take your time, don't lose your patience, you'll get it. You may have to, it helps if you can maybe push on the band a little bit, compress the band, and not keep your stand from rolling. I really got to chalk these wheels. There we go. And drop down in there. All right, so I got the low reverse band in place, and I'm not sure if anybody caught this or not, but after giving all that information about making sure that this bracket was in here correctly, that the short arc here is towards the case and the wide arc is towards the drum and towards the band, I put it in backwards. I went to put the low reverse drum in. Nothing would line up. Couldn't get it past the band because the band wouldn't move over enough. Found out that, yep, I had put that in backwards, so had to tear this all apart and fix that. But now that that's done, I can continue on. Next step is to install the low reverse drum. So I'm going to lube up both this inner race and outer surface with some trans fluid, and then drop this into place. It's going to be snug. It's going to take some work to get it down all the way. But the ring, it should clear this outer snout, or this snout, from the overdrive piston support, because that's got a snap ring that's actually going to go inside here. So let's work on getting that in place. So you guys got to get it lined up, get it down inside the band. And that is in place. Now also you can check it, make sure that everything's going good so far, is that it's only going to rotate in one direction. It will not rotate counterclockwise, only clockwise, and it should spin freely. We'll put in the snap ring that goes on the end of the overdrive piston support. All right, so next comes the rear gear assembly, which consists of your housing. There's a thrust plate in there. I think you can see that. The rear gear planetary, which rides inside, and then a thrust washer. So I like to try to do this kind of in stages, just because this needs a seat all the way down inside there. So I'm going to put this in first. Make sure it seats all the way down in there. Feels pretty good. And then we'll drop the planetary in and the thrust washer. Now you'll know if your case isn't in all the way, because these teeth, you can see here, are lined up. So they recess down inside there and lock everything in place. Next comes the driving shell with the sun gear installed. I never took that apart when I did my inspection. And it drops right down on there. Followed by another thrust washer. And then the forward planetary. Once those are in, install the snap ring. After the snap ring, it's followed by, this is actually called a race, and then this 3-lobed washer. And those 3 lobes actually lock into the forward shaft, or the front shaft, or whatever it's called. The other shaft that comes from the pump to here. All right, so now is when the fun begins. So here is the forward drum. I took that 3-lobe washer that was on the end of the shaft there, and I installed it here in the end of the forward drum. This also has some clutches and steels in it. You can see all the little teeth around the edge. Those need to line up with the gear down there. So getting this installed can be a bit of a chore sometimes. But so what I did, I just took a pick, stuck it in there, something small enough to get in there and help align all the teeth on those clutches. And now I'll try to get it in place. And you'll feel it. There's 1, 2. I think that was all 3. 1 more to go still. There we go. There's all 3. Now it's fully seated. Next comes the direct drum, and the same thing. Clutches and steels, they need to align with the gears on the forward drum. And then these teeth also need to line up with the teeth around the perimeter of the direct drum. All right, with all that in place, now comes the front band. So you got the band, and you got these 2 pieces. This goes against the adjustment screw that comes in through the side of the case. And then this rod goes between this point on the band here and the lever actuated by the piston. And I'll show that in just a second. There you can see the band in place. There's the small piece that goes up against the adjustment screw, which comes through the side of the case. And then that rod goes between the band and the lever here controlled by the piston. So now we're ready for the front pump. One thing that I did do is on the side here, that adjustment screw for the front band, I tightened that down so that it would tighten the band down around the drum, and that just helps to keep everything aligned to make sure nothing gets bumped and knocked out, especially with all those clutches. You don't want to bump something and have it maybe tilt and then knock one of the clutches off the gear. Then you got to fight to get it all back together. So you tighten that front band down, it just kind of helps to hold everything. But with that done, you can install the pump. So we start with the gasket, goes around, seals the pump to the case. There's really only one way that can go in because of all the holes along the bottom. Then we'll put the pump in place. And same thing with the pump, it can only go in one way, and that's to make sure that all the holes align properly. Is that thing in wrong? Yep. Had the gasket in upside down. All right, and then the pump, like I said, the pump can only go in one way. So with the pump installed, that pretty much finishes up all the gear train inside there. So now I'm ready to flip the transmission over and install the valve body. Before I do the valve body though, I'm going to go ahead and do my band adjustments. So I'm going to start with the kickdown band. That's the one right here in the front. And to make that adjustment, there's this square-headed bolt or square-headed screw right here, right by the output to the cooler. That's a 5/16 head. So I'm going to snug that down, not too much, because then I'm going to come back with a crow's foot on a torque wrench and torque this to 72 inch-pounds, and then back that out 2.5 turns. All right, with that torque to 72 inch-pounds, now I'm going to back it out 2.5 turns. Quarter, half, 3/4, 1, 2, and 1/2. Now tighten down the lock nut. When tightening the lock nut down, you want to make sure that you hold the adjustment screw in place, keep that from moving, and then you can tighten down the lock nut. That's going to get tightened down 30 foot-pounds if I can get a torque wrench in here. Next comes a low reverse band, which is right here. This is the adjustment screw. Same thing, we tighten that down to 72 inch-pounds, back it off 2 turns, and then tighten down the lock nut. With the bands adjusted, valve body's next, and all the bolts get torqued to 105 inch-pounds. Now I'm not snugging them down at all, I'm just getting them down. Not putting any, just running them down, making sure everything's lined up right. Everything starts right, no cross threading, nothing like that. Now on the torque. 105 pounds. All right, with the valve body in, last video I talked about replacing, this is the overdrive spring, I forget exactly what it's called, but this spring came out of right here. And this is where on the other side of the valve body, on the outside of the case, is where the overdrive connection is. So this is the original spring, and these are known apparently for breaking. I mean, it's a really weak spring. So I ordered a replacement. As you can see, this one is a much beefier spring. So I'm going to install this one, get rid of this one, and I'll put the cap back on. And the cap here is just held in place with some more little torque screws. Of course, I can't really put any torque on those. My hands being all covered in transmission fluid. Here we go. Rag helps. And if the rag's not enough, this handle actually has a 1/4-inch drive fitting in the top. And of course, before installing the pan, we do a new filter and a new pan gasket. With the pan bolts installed, they all get torqued to 150 inch-pounds. Now, I haven't installed these two because this is where the bracket goes for my my shift cable. So those get 2 different bolts. But I'm gonna go ahead and torque the rest of the pan bolts down. And there you go, guys. The reassembly of the 46 RH is done. All I gotta do is install the torque converter. If I can actually get my hands on the correct torque converter, a whole other story. Then this thing will be ready to go between the frame rails of the D100. And honestly, this is only the second time that I've torn into an automatic transmission. The first time was when I rebuilt the 904 that was originally in the D100. Don't be scared. You know, it can be intimidating, I know. You know, when I did the 904, you know, I had no idea what I was getting into. And it's not really that bad. As long as you take your time and you stay organized and keep track of all the bits and pieces and how everything came apart so you can get it back together in the same order, it's really not that bad. So I appreciate you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you on the next one.